So, welcome to the day of transition practice. Thank you all for joining us live or watching the recording later. We are here for the Transition Narratives, our story in 2024 session. And our aim today is to collectively sense how the transition movement narrative has evolved during the last almost 2 decades, what transition means nowadays, and which other narratives can be relevant to co-create motivational stories that are honest and accurate to the realities we all live, with the awareness that each individual and collective circumstances and narratives can be very different from one another in many ways. So probably we can speak about a plurality of transition narratives. So during this session, we are going to have a first panel of presentations about narratives. First, a transition movement framing by Rob Hopkins. Then Andrew Sage will share about SolarPunk. Manda Scott will talk about Thrutopias, weaving this movement narrative with the transition one. And this will be some sort of triggers for reflection. And this part will be followed by a conversation between Dennise Dueñas and Filipa Pimentel, both very active in different places of the transition movement, reflecting about the framing, what they just heard from the panelists. And finally, we will have a space for questions from the audience to all the speakers. And since we'll all be talking and sharing a lot about concepts and ideas, I really invite us to stay grounded in our bodies and take care of our present needs. And we are delighted to have such an amazing panel of speakers. So let's introduce them.
So we're going to start with the video by Rob Hopkins, who is unfortunately not able to be here. He's one of the founders of the Transition Network and of Transition Town Partners, which was, as most of us will know, the first transition town that existed. He has authored a variety of books, including the Transition Handbook, and most recently, From What If to What Is, Unleashing the Power of Imagination to Create the Future We Want. He hosts the podcast From What If to What Next. He has spoken at several TEDx events and appeared in French film Phenomenon Domain. You can find more about him on his website, which is robhopkins.net, which we will put in the chat.
There it is. Thank you. And after Rob Hopkins' video, we will have Manda Scott. She is a novelist, smallholder, and defines herself as a renegade economist. She hosts the podcast Accidental Guts on exploring how we can create a future that we would be proud of to leave to the generations to come. And she's also a co-designer of Thrutopia Writing Masterclass, designed to sweep a generation of writers across a narrative gap to a plausible, flourishing future. You can get to know a bit more on her website, which will also be in the chat. Thank you, Philip.
And that gets us to Andrew Sage. Andrew is a writer and artist, organizer, and YouTuber based in Trinidad and Tobago. As an ardent anarchist and firm believer in power to the people, Andrew aims to invigorate imaginations and encourage people to create a better world in the shell of the old. Through his YouTube channel, Andrewism, he's aiming to learn and explore as much as possible. He has published content on culture, politics, and of special relevance to this session on SolarPunk. See the link in the chat.
And so we first will listen to them, and later we will have a conversation, a spontaneous conversation, where Dennise Dueñas and Filipa will talk. Dennise Dueñas is a graphic communicator and interdisciplinary artist with expertise in collaborative network facilitation, participatory leadership, and intercultural environmental education through the living arts. She's an artivist, cultural manager, and facilitator in the Transición Colombia Hub, Transición Avia Yala, Casa Colombia, Casa Latina, and the movement for Mother Earth rights. Also, her information, the links in the chat.
And last but not least, there is Filipa Pimentel. Filipa is a Portuguese forest scientist by training. She worked for a decade in several EU institutions related to sustainable development as a political advisor. Later, she quit her job to dedicate herself fully to the transition movement at different scales. Filipa is currently co-leading Transition Network. She is part of the Belgium Transition Hub and a member of 2 neighboring transition initiatives in Portugal, as well as the initiator of Micelio, an emergent movement of movements for regeneration in Portugal.
Thank you. Thank you, Philippe, and thank you all for making time to be and share with us today. It's amazing to have such a wonderful panel, as well as a lot of participants from all around the globe. Thank you all for making it today. And so now it's Rob Hopkins' time. He couldn't join us today, but he shared a video with us for the occasion.
Hello, I'm Rob Hopkins. I'm one of the founders of this thing called Transition, which it's a joy to see celebrated so fulsomely here in this event today. And I've been asked to speak a little bit about the narratives of transition, which is a subject which is very, very close to my heart. So I've been given a few questions to shape what I'm going to say. And the first one of those was, what did transition mean at the start? What was its narrative back then? Which takes us back to 2006, to Totnes in deepest, darkest Devon, when a group of us kicked off something that we called Transition Town. And at that point, the narrative was about climate change and peak oil, this idea that we were close to a peak in the world's oil production, which would somehow change everything. And we imagined transition as Richard Heinberg put it, more like a party than a protest march. Process rooted in a place. Transition would look the same and yet very different everywhere that it emerged, and it very rapidly began to emerge in many very, very, very different places. We imagined it as a self-organizing process which was free to join. There was no annual membership fee or anything. The idea was that you would share your stories back into this network. It became an international network of narrative, if you like, and I loved that. And it was so thrilling to see the dazzling diversity of the stories that began to emerge, from community farms to local currency projects, from community energy initiatives to new community well-being projects. The narrative that the world was seeing, as one person put it, was that transition was a movement of hope with its sleeves rolled up, which I just think is beautiful. It grew quickly into a void, as no one else was really doing that. As one of the movement's main storytellers, I was always looking for people for different elements in that narrative. Who were the people? Why did they start it? Who did they meet? What were the unexpected serendipities that made it happen? What were the standout quotes that made it a story that other people would share, that would, before we even really use the term, help that story to go viral? And I remember speaking to a guy in Liège once who had just raised, in Belgium, who had just raised 2.5 million euros to start a cooperative vineyard. And I asked him, how did you do that? Like, what made you think, oh yeah, we'll do that and we'll raise 2.5 million euros? And he looked at me slightly puzzled, and he said, it's Belgium. People like wine. People have some money. Don't be afraid. So I loved that story. The bits that made that story relatable, those details that I would be looking out for, the bits that most people could listen to that and think, yeah, we could do that. I could do that. And for many years, I would often share in my talk an image from a punk magazine in 1977, which showed how to play 3 chords on a guitar and then said, here are 3 chords, now form a band. And I always looked for stories that had a similar kind of a narrative to them. And I also came to realize that I didn't need that 20 minutes at the beginning of my talks with all the terrifying graphs and pictures of tar sands that showed how terrible everything was. When I showed those, I noticed people would lean away from me. And when I start to tell stories of people doing something about it in that kind of a way, people would lean towards me. We are a storytelling creature, and we should never forget that. So let's create a movement that people lean towards, I thought. The narrative of transition has changed over the years. Luigi Rusi, in his book, Everything Gardens, a brilliant study of transition in Totnes, wrote that academics like to think of transition as a movement, as a fixed thing that can be studied kind of under a microscope. But the most interesting thing about it, he said, is the transition moving, the way that it changes and adapts and absorbs new influences and ideas. And that's a key part of the narrative too, I think. I love how every few years we throw the transition model up in the air and let it land and settle, and then to allow us to re-explain what it is and what it looks like. I love that refusal to believe that any of this is carved in stone, that it's a living, breathing experiment that learns from itself, and that's an incredibly precious thing. In terms of how transition has evolved since, I think the narrative now speaks much more clearly about social justice, about diversity, about inclusion, something we didn't speak about enough at the start. Part of the narrative has always been the way we do things matters as much as what we do, what we call inner transition. And the narrative of Transition Network as an organization that fundamentally reorganized itself along the principles of holacracy into a flat structure that operates in a very different way is a really powerful one, I think. Another part of the narrative that became a focus on social enterprise, on turning the transition enterprise into community businesses that own land and buildings and businesses for the community benefit, a recognition that this needs to provide livelihoods and employment for many people. And as someone who visits a lot of places and speaks at a lot of events, I've come to see how vitally important that transition narrative is for people to be able to point to the potential of bottom-up activism and to tell stories about it. Brings something vitally important to discussions that can otherwise get lost in conversations about policy and finance. The stories that we tell, the narratives that we tell, are vitally important. In terms of what transition and its narrative looks like in 2024, well, I have my own particular take on this, as anyone who follows my work will know. I feel like, as well as what I have already mentioned, one of the great strengths of transition is it's a movement rooted in the imagination and in the cultivation of longing. It encourages people to vision a future they long for and then to make it happen. As the great prison abolitionist campaigner in the US, Mariam Kaba, puts it, we must imagine while we build, always both. Often people doing work around the radical imagination and positive futurism are criticized for being somehow outside of reality, for dreaming rather than doing. For me, there are so many stories from across the transition movement that show that that is simply not true. Indeed, that it is the dreaming, the futures work, if well done, that creates the magnetic force in front of us, the whirlpool that drags us towards it, our new North Star, if you like, a new constellation to guide us by. I wonder if we might suggest that the narrative of transition now includes a belief that its core purpose is the nurturing and cultivation of longing. After all, as Don DeLillo, the novelist, wrote, longing on a large scale is what makes history. For me, that's when storytelling comes into its own. How can we use what we have already created in this movement to support us in telling a story that helps people to really step into and imagine the future?
We live in a time of great challenges and great opportunities. Climate change, environmental degradation, and social inequality are just some of the issues that we face. What if I told you that there's a movement that inspires hope and offers solutions for a better world? That's what SolarPunk is all about. As someone anxious about the fate of our world, SolarPunk is what helped me realize that the future's uncertainty is cause for hope, not despair. SolarPunk is everything from a positive imagining of our collective futures to actually creating it. It derives its name from the cyberpunk genre, but it aims to go beyond what is to what if. SolarPunk looks beyond the limitations of capitalism and beyond the current rift between humanity and nature, focusing on what we should hope for rather than just what to avoid. Humanity still has so much untapped potential, and SolarPunk represents a shining vision of a future inspired by African, Asian, and indigenous art styles and aesthetics, and grounded in our existing world that emphasizes our need for environmental sustainability, autonomy, and social justice. SolarPunk is not just a genre of science fiction or a visual aesthetic, though those are perhaps its most potent draws for people. Solarpunk is also capable of exploring the intersection between humanity and between nature and between technology. It has the potential, already partially realized, to rally a real movement for change around the world, composed of ordinary people, artists, writers, designers, activists, and thinkers of every background, with its vision of a future that's sustainable, free, and just. For those who don't know me, my name is Andrew Sage, and I run the YouTube channel Andrewism, with the aim of learning and exploring as much as possible. Growing up in Trinidad, where I still live to this day, I spent much of my childhood dreaming of a world with superheroes, robots, and flying cars. My dreams may have evolved since then, but I never let go of that imaginative spirit. Solarpunk, for me, is a way of creating that transition between imagination and action in the here and now for a thriving future. The term solarpunk was first coined by a blog named Republic of the Bees in May 2008 to describe a potential literary genre. The speculative fiction genre would quietly evolve over the next few years, but it truly rose to prominence with a Tumblr post in May 2014 by Miss Olivia Louise, who established and popularized solarpunk aesthetics. In September 2014, Adam Flynn published Solarpunk, Notes Toward a Manifesto, expressing the hope of the genre and the movement and emphasizing its ingenuity, generativity, independence, and community. A Solarpunk manifesto was published in 2019, and the Solarpunk community has continued to grow and evolve ever since. Anthologies and stories set in solarpunk worlds being published every passing year, popularizing a new vision of the future. But let's look beyond the stories, because solarpunk is more than just stories. The relationship between politics and solarpunk is still being navigated, and folks tend to take it in a couple of different directions. To me, the fight for solarpunk is an uphill battle that seeks to plant the seeds of reimagination in the minds of many here now, without waiting for authorities. But solarpunk cannot stand alone. It must be connected to anti-capitalist movements, abolitionist movements, land back movements, DIY movements, permaculture movements, transition movements, tenant movements, anti-colonial movements, workers' movements, all these projects for the empowerment and liberation of all. Around the same time that I discovered solarpunk, I also discovered anarchism, and anarchism very quickly became the foundation upon which my solarpunk desires would be realized. My solarpunk ideals became shaped more and more by my anarchist philosophy. In short, anarchism is the term given to political philosophy and practice that opposes all hierarchies along with their justifying dogmas and proposes the unending pursuit of anarchy, a world without government where free association, self-determination, and mutual aid form the basis of our society. It is a rejection of that dichotomy between rulers, and rule is a rejection of the hierarchies of old and of today, capitalism, statism, white supremacy, patriarchy, etc. It is an ongoing practice of flattening hierarchies where they exist. But beyond rejecting what is, anarchists also dare to imagine what if. As in, what if we organize our society through free association and mutual aid? And what if we move with the intention of seeing such a society come into fruition? Solarpunk may not be specific to any ideology, but is often associated with anarchism for a reason. It has long attracted anarchists, and aiding the creation of new ones because the aims of both are so easily aligned. Few imagine a world of today's institutions and politics when they think of their solarpunk ideal, and that's for good reason. The state has proven itself incapable of doing what is necessary to curtail climate change because they're beholden to global and national financial interests, and such necessary interventions interfere with their power and electability. Worse yet, when it does act, its projects may not go far enough or fail to engage with those who need most to succeed. Meanwhile, capitalism works hand in hand with the state to limit any major changes from taking place and ensure its continued ravenous pursuit of extractive economic growth. I discuss all of this on my channel. Solarpunk is not a vision that can be imposed from above. Rather, it is a prefigurative project and vision of liberation we must all participate in, shaped by our unique local conditions and individual needs as we imagine and work towards a better society. A solarpunk world can only be brought about through action. That action starts with stories, of course, and that's the power of transition narratives, the power of solarpunk stories, but stories are not enough. Imagination is not enough by itself. We need action, we need transition, and we need it here now. That is how we will thrive.
Andrew, just sorry to interrupt you, but people is asking for you to speak a bit slower as the interpreter can't cope with the rhythm. Thank you.
Sure. Do I need to start over or just continue?
You can continue, but quite well.
Okay.
They say a lot slower than before.
Sure. I just wanted to make sure I stayed in the
Thank you.
time. All
Thank
right.
you.
The future is what we make it. It's what we do now, in this moment, that will make the difference. If you want to thrive in a SolarPunk world, you have to build it. The transition movement has already embraced one of the 3 approaches that can contribute to a SolarPunk transformation, but the other 2 are just as vital for lasting change. The 3 approaches are prefiguration, confrontation, and non-cooperation. Prefiguration is the one I see most in the transition movement, creating alternative structures that embody our desired future and foster momentum for broader societal transformation. But the other 2 are less prevalent. Confrontation involves direct actions like protests, blockades, and sabotage to challenge environmentally destructive practices and target those responsible. And non-cooperation involves strikes, boycotts, and debt refusals to disrupt harmful systems, emphasizing our collective power for change. There's this idea in politics these days that imagination has no place in our pragmatic, no-nonsense world, which is false. Humans are flexible creatures, capable of a whole range of social arrangements. If everyone limited themselves to the confines of what is, we wouldn't be where we are today. We can determine our possibilities through the experiments we create and the actions we take with others to strive towards a SolarPunk world. So ask yourself, who can I bring on to join me? And what skills and practices and lifestyle choices can I pursue that can complement this project? Maybe that's permaculture. Maybe that's DIY. Maybe that's upcycling. Maybe that's rewilding. And maybe that's community building. Whatever you pursue, SolarPunk inspires a mosaic of possibilities that center human flexibility and nature's bounty, which our present world is organized to destroy, but our future world must prioritize. As it is popularly said, SolarPunk is a future with a human face and dirt behind its ears, and it can be ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I hope that Pablo can just breathe for a moment. It was really interesting. It's okay. Thank you, everybody who raised that, and we could fix it. So thanks a lot for sharing. And now it's time for Manda Scott. She will be talking about Thrutopias. You can share screen when you'd like.
I shall, and I will endeavor to go slowly. You just need to shout at me if I'm going over time. I'm going to share my screen. If I maximize my slides to fill the whole screen, my computer shuts down because it's quite old. So I'm not going to do that. You'll just see the slides the size they are. If they're too small, let me know. Okay. Alrighty. So I think there's a large extent to which Rob, Andrew, and I are all pretty much saying the same thing. And the bottom line of the same thing is that capitalism is a disimagination machine. It is designed to stop us imagining. When we are under stress, our creativity closes down. It's physiologically impossible to be creative while under sympathetic overload. So everything that we are trying to do is stretch the boundaries of our creativity so that we can create that future that we would be proud to leave behind. Is that a decent rate, can I ask? Can somebody give me a thumb, Filipa? Yeah? Okay, cool. Alrighty, so this is me. Actually, as of today, this is me. I have an actual physical copy. I used to write historical novels. If you've heard of me at all, you've likely heard of the Boudica series. I used to think that if we knew who we were, before the Romans came to these lands, the islands of Britain, where we were, the indigenous culture was what I would call an initiation culture as opposed to a trauma culture, that we would shed the shackles of Rome and step into the being that we could be. And some people do. But more recently, I've realized that what we need from everybody who writes is stories of actually how we get to a future, because I was making too big a leap. So now all of my writing, I predicate on Amitav Ghosh, who wrote in The Great Derangement, "When future generations look back upon the Great Derangement, they will certainly blame the leaders and politicians of this time for their failure to address the climate crisis." And now we would say the polycrisis, the meta-crisis, all of it. But they may well hold artists and writers to be equally culpable. And the italics here are mine. For the imagining of possibilities is not, after all, the job of politicians and bureaucrats. And I would go further and say that if they were capable of imagining other systems, they would not have the jobs that they do. They are there because the system is designed to perpetuate the system, and we need a new system. However, it is easier to imagine the total extinction of all life on Earth than it is to imagine an end to capitalism. We hit this all of the time. We go out there with our narratives of change, and we are faced with people going, yes, but it can't work. Yes, but the forces against are too huge. If I believe that to be true, I wouldn't be here. But we need to acknowledge that that is the current narrative. And it was a long, long time ago that Buckminster Fuller said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you need to build a new model that makes the old model, the existing model, obsolete. And so this is what Thrutopian writing endeavors to do. Again, this was Gary Snyder back in 1970. Most of you weren't born then. It would be best to consider this as a revolution not of guns, but of consciousness, which will be won by seizing the key images, myths, archetypes, eschatologies, and ecstasies, so that life will not seem worth living unless one is on the transforming energies side. And as Rob and Andrew both said, we are a storied species. Everything that we do, from getting a new job, to buying a new house, to buying a new puppy, I went to look at puppies this morning, to entering into a new relationship, is founded on the stories that we tell ourselves, of ourselves, and that we tell each other of ourselves and each other. And we need to break the boundaries of those stories and build new ones. This is self-evident. We are in the transition. The old paradigm is breaking down. And the question is, what will arise from the ashes? We're back to Gramsci, that we're in the interregnum between the old and the new, and we don't know what the new is going to be. It's up to us to make it. And there are plenty of other people trying to make it in ways that we don't want. It is my belief that, as Andrew said and Rob was suggesting, that we need total political and economic transformation. And most people are not getting their heads around that. I'm reading Natalie Bennett's book, Change Everything. Totally recommend it. I think she is just about there, but she has to be one of the very few of our politicians who gets that we need total systemic change. But we have to start where we are. I'm going to move a bit faster because we're running out of time. So this is the SUHA movement, is sustainable happiness. Chris Johnson, who wrote Active Hope with Joanna Macy, has just triggered this. And he says that if a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is what our generation was taught at school, utopias are about happy endings. Dystopias are about the endings we all want to avoid. And I am so angry with any of my writing contemporaries who write dystopias now. They are lazy and they don't work. Thrutopias are about the energy of getting to the place or heading towards where we want to go, starting exactly where we are. The term comes from Rupert Read, who wrote a paper in the Huffington Post in 2017. I am going to keep moving on. 2, I am a writer and I'm speaking mostly to writers. I am trying to persuade every single writer that I know to start writing of the ways forward. Anyone who's writing history now is completely wasting their time. Anyone who is writing anything that is set in a business as usual world is creating propaganda for the old system. And yet, everyone is creative, all of us, whether we see ourselves as writers or not. We hold conversations with our family and friends, with the people we meet in the queue in the supermarket. We spread ideas in social media all of the time. And I think what matters now is that those ideas be ideas of how we move forward, that each of us commits never again to spreading any ideas that are anchored in the current system. Let's move on. This is way past. Okay, so this is just to remind you that other people have said this before, and then I will stop. This is Ursula Le Guin, who is my absolute writing hero. And she said back in 2014, a decade ago, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change begin in art, very often in our art, the art of words. And anyone who speaks is an artist with words." I will leave you with that. We need to dream big and we need to speak our dreams aloud. There we go. I'm done. That was a bit long. Sorry.
Thank you ever so much. That was great. And thanks to all the other panelists as well. So that concludes the first part of our session, and we'll be moving into the second part, in which we have a conversation and some reflections by Dennise and Filipa, who we've introduced already, very active in the transition movement in different places and different levels of scale. So we will be asking Dennise and Filipa to address a question for us, which is, what is alive in you after listening to the 3 contributions we have now heard, the panelists, and how does what's alive in you now, as you have listened, relate to the transition movement? So we'll be inviting Dennise first to share some reflections about what you've just heard. And we'll try to do this slowly still for interpretation reasons, and also Spanish being Filipa's 4th language. So let's go through this slowly.
Chihuizwa, un poco cuchie, hicha hicha. Un saludo a todas, a todos.
Greetings, everybody, family from heart to heart. And just greeting you with our ancestral language of the Muisca people in Colombia. I'm just saying, I am you and you are me. So I'm very thankful, greeting all the territories who are here, all those seeds, all the light seeds that we are bringing these histories, these narratives together. And this conversation is very inspiring. And I was thinking mostly about our history as humanity. Not only the transition movement as such, but what have we done as humanity transitioning on this earth? And so the big
podemos compartir y ponerlo sobre la mesa en el centro y poder hablar de qué hemos hecho como humanidad. Entonces me remite mucho así como algo que traía Débora, como pensando mucho tiempo atrás, y que para nosotros aquí en las Américas, en Abya, afortunadamente están vivos nuestros pueblos originarios, nuestros pueblos ancestrales, con la sabiduría que ha seguido sosteniendo territorios para la vida, territorios vivos, a través de vivir con una ley de origen, ¿no? En un círculo donde cada uno de los talentos, donde cada uno de los seres tiene una labor. Y esto es algo que seguimos encontrando en este momento actual. Entonces, donde ponemos cada uno nuestro propio corazón al servicio de todos, al mayor propósito de la vida, se activa algo que también lo nombraba un poco Rob, ¿no? Que es este magnetismo de no solo imaginar y recrear, sino del amor, ¿no? Entonces salimos del miedo, de la separación, de la desconfianza que ha venido años tras años, ¿no? En nuestra historia humana, y nos magnetizamos con el amor, nos unimos con el otro. Entonces aquí le llamamos nosotros la minga, la mano cambiada, el convite, la juntanza, en donde nos llamamos como familia a un propósito mayor. Y en ese círculo también pues se conecta nuestro corazón al centro del fuego, y ese corazón unido de toda la familia a un mismo nivel se conecta con el corazón del cielo y con el corazón de la tierra, que nos recuerda que acá estamos con muchas más familias, no solamente la humana, que acá estamos con la familia agua, con la gente montaña, con la gente bosque. Y esto es algo que en este tiempo nos está volviendo a conectar juntos. Pero bueno, aquí me gustaría hacer un tejido de palabra con Filipa, ¿cierto? En donde pues aquí nos hemos ido enamorando uno de otros, acá estamos toda una familia desde diferentes partes de la tierra, representando también a todas nuestras generaciones atrás, pensándonos en las de adelante. Entonces, pues bonito hacer esta conversa, Filipa, cómo seguimos tejiendo esta palabra de inspiración.
Sí, muy bien. Gracias, Dennise. Filipa, ¿quieres compartir algo?
Muchas gracias, Cucu. Bueno, estoy un poco como con dificultades con el español. Yo lo que quería decir, ¿puedo cambiar en inglés y después vengo más una vez? Gracias.
Yes, no problem.
Gracias. Gracias. So, from what Cuckoo says and about the question that you had for me, for us, what inspires me about all these narratives that have been moving, I'm really touched by what Nenad said, that we should be called the transition moving and not movement. So it's really like that. And I think this is one of the things that is the most difficult to explain to the current system, because I'm always in this kind of fringe between our movement and explaining this to the current system. And it's really difficult because people really want us to decide what is the narrative. And the narrative is about the change. So change needs to be moving. And the narrative is really we need to learn how to sit with the uncomfort, with the discomfort of not knowing and being in present and expressing that. What for us transition is today, what is for me transition. And there are things that have not been changing. For me, one of the main things that didn't change is the head, heart, and hands. So the holistic approach about what change is about. We all have different profiles, and we all are in transition. Some very, very developed, some not. But one thing is true, is that we are living in this system that is so resilient. The capitalism, the system where we live in, it's most of us, right? So let's come back to the center. This movement started in Europe, so in the north. It's not the case anymore. So when we say that we are in the capitalist system, some of us are not, but the ones that are not are feeling the impact of it. So, right? So we are all touched by it, even if we are not in it. And this is the cuckoo, where you talk about the original peoples. This is what I'm talking about. They feel the impact on that. And normally it's very, very bad and very unfair. So the other thing I wanted to say is that fun, we always forget. Imagination and fun needs to be there. And then what I say as well is that we imagine where we want to be in. We use our creativity, and we instead of keeping imagining, the movement is we are taught and we are engaged to experiment and not be afraid of making mistakes. We imagine, we experiment, we just have that active hope. But for that to happen well, we need to be rooted in values and integrity and be prepared for change internally. So this is about in a transition, about, we need to be the agents of change, but we need to be change as well. So this is something that is very strong in the movement as well. And then I heard something about different ways of unlock the system. And this is something that I really feel that is interesting, that is coming from all over the place in places that I work with transitioners. That is, there is always this question about, are we doing the right thing? Because we need to do, or people that say, oh, the movement is so positive and so on, we should do something else. For change, it needs to be, in my point of view, holistic. And there are loads of strategies that we could take. And we cannot take all of them. We choose the one that is fit for us. And for me, there is something that the IFF, that is the International Futures Forum, says that really touches me. That is what we need to do, and some of the key for change sometimes is small acts of creative disobedience, and I love that. And for me, this is something that really fits in my narrative of transition. And then coming back to something that we all forget is to learn about what we forgot, that was put aside by the system we live in, that is to come back and learn about connection, as with as Kuku was saying, connection with the other system, the natural system, connection with ourselves, connection with nature, connection with each other, but nature holistically, the spiritual, etc., etc. So for me, this is more and more present in the initiatives that I see, and this is what I would like to see.
Great. Thank you very much, Filipa. Manda, would you like, before Manda will have to leave us for a different session. Manda, is there a few thoughts you want to share just before you go?
I don't think so. I don't think I've got anything to add to that. I think everything that Kuku and Filipa said is expanding on what we've already said. So I think their words stand for themselves without me adding to them. I just, yes to everything. This is how we step out of the trauma culture into a new initiation culture, is learning from how the existing initiation cultures work and being the viral spread of that. So thank you. I'm sorry, guys, I have to go and talk to another transition group about writing. So I will head off, but have a wonderful time. And thank you all for giving me the space and the time here.
Thank you very much. So we're going to give maybe another 5-10 minutes to the conversation until we have some questions from people. Dennise, ¿cómo te parece? ¿Hay algo más que quieres compartir, Dennise?
Vale. Bueno, aquí pues pensándonos mucho como también en la responsabilidad evolutiva que tenemos como humanidad justo en este momento, en donde pues ya vemos, y la historia nos lo ha demostrado, lo que no funciona. Entonces el poder que nos da la creatividad de abrir otras brechas, otros caminos, reinventarnos y cómo surge en un lado una cosa, otro lado otra cosa. em, pero finalmente la chispa divina que tenemos como seres cósmicos, como continuación de ancestros de atrás, que también sembraron el agua, sembraron comida que es la que estamos comiendo hoy, que es el aire que estamos respirando hoy, y también cuál es esa gran pregunta que nos une, ¿qué estamos dejando para las siguientes generaciones, ¿no? No solamente de la gente humana, que fue una gran desconexión, un gran espacio, un vacío, porque todos nuestros pueblos ancestrales alrededor de la gran casa madre, de la gran madre tierra, así como los maicitos, ¿no? Todos semillitas pegaditas a una misma casa, y cada uno con su espacio y su propia identidad y su propio cuerpo, ninguno empuja al otro a decirle, oiga, córrase porque este es mi espacio, ¿no? Sin fronteras, sino permitiendo que el otro sea y el otro exista, y en donde viene también con su propio plan de vida. La semilla sabe que viene a nacer dentro de la oscuridad de la madre tierra. Y esos ciclos que hemos perdido también como humanidad, de recordarnos esos ciclos humanos, incluso para nosotras las mujeres también con nuestros ciclos y nuestros periodos lunares es un poco fácil, ¿no? Pero también los hombres recordando cómo es este ciclo entre existir como un ser vivo, como una chispa también que sostiene la creatividad y la biodiversidad de lo que existe. Somos seres irrepetibles, así como un árbol, como una flor, como una abejita, ¿no? Nosotros mismos como familia humana en una sola casa. Todos somos uno. Entonces, si pensamos bonito en todos, pues esto es lo que nos va a llegar a todos. Desde aquí nosotros en esas narrativas, también recogiendo esas historias que han viajado millones de años entre nuestras piedras, en nuestros tejidos, en nuestras cerámicas, en nuestra semilla viva, viene la profecía del arco iris y la profecía del cóndor águila, que es en este momento que vemos estos desequilibrios, estos desniveles, donde el norte global se ha comido un poco el sur global, para, en un concepto del vivir mejor. Nosotros aquí, desde las cosmovisiones andinas, tenemos el concepto y la cosmovisión y el desarrollo cultural a través del buen vivir, que es muy diferente al concepto desarrollista y a lo que viene trayendo la imposición económica extractivista sobre nuestros territorios, que siguen desapareciendo ecosistemas vitales, no solamente para Latinoamérica o las Américas, sino para todos nosotros. Todo lo que pasa en el Amazonas nos está influyendo a todos, ¿no? Entonces, desde ahí, estas historias antiguas tejidas como con tanta sabiduría vienen y emergen de nuevo y nos están llamando a este nuevo tiempo. Es un nuevo tiempo de parir la nueva humanidad. Nosotros aquí juntos y juntas, agradeciendo a todos los círculos que están levantados en cada montaña, a los guardianes y guardianas que existen en este momento, a los que se han metido desde lo jurídico a hablar de los derechos de la madre tierra también, que es como un ego, ¿no? Si uno le preguntara a la madre tierra, ¿qué piensas de esto? No, pues mis hijos me están dando los derechos, ¿no? Pero para nosotros como humanos es un poquito el ejercicio pedagógico de entender que un río tiene el derecho de existir, que no lo podemos correr porque se nos da la gana, ¿no? Y que para vivir mejor, entonces no podemos seguir explotando a los del sur porque queremos vivir mejor. Entonces, el llamado de nuestros fuegos vivos en este momento es: recordémonos como una sola familia en la casa madre, recordemos con mucha compasión, con mucho amor, poniendo lo máximo. Yo quiero agradecer también a todos los seres que en diferentes lugares de la tierra han entregado su vida a la defensa de la tierra, a los pueblos indígenas que aún viven 305 en Brasil, 115 en Colombia, más de 80 en México. Todavía hay muchos que siguen emergiendo, muchas lenguas vivas, y es muy importante que mantengamos la unidad en la diversidad, que creo que lo que nos va a seguir dando esa inteligencia de sostenernos, adaptarnos y volver a una cultura regenerativa es que traigamos esos ingredientes de la diferencia, porque son muy ricos, nos traen mucha información. Entonces, bueno, ahí sigo la puntada, que siga el maíz sembrándose en el corazón de cada uno, y quería pues terminar con una frase aymara que dice: que todos vayamos juntos, que nadie se quede atrás, que alcance para todos todo y que a nadie le falte nada. Fishing Gafie.
Thank you, Dennise. Filipa, one more chance for you to echo.
I'm going to speak in Spanish now. Cucu, una de las cosas que digo yo muchas veces con los grupos que tengo yo en Europa, ¿sabes? Es el problema que tenemos nosotros en nuestra sociedad, es estamos viviendo una era de separación. La separación entre nosotros, con nosotros en la naturaleza y la cosmología, todo eso. Y es una cosa que yo en mi grupo pienso mucho cómo con todo lo que yo he aprendido con transición y con gente como tú y las otras chicas de Abya Yala y de otras personas que han trabajado mucho con eso, es la aprendizaje, ¿cómo dices? Como desmontar las características del sistema corriente que están en la piel de la gente, que no sabe mismo que eso es un problema que no es humano, que es una cosa del sistema. Y hay mucho trabajo que nosotros hacemos para corregirlo. ¿Cómo podemos, sabes? Es que es como todo un sistema de que la gente vive de separación, es como has dicho, los sistemas del norte, para vivir mejor, está explorando otros, pero solo otros porque no, ¿sabes? No hay otros, somos todos, ¿sabes? Es que la gente y todo eso es en todos niveles, que tienes que aprender como, ¿sabes? Desmontar todo para comprender que tú no eres tú solo y tu familia no es tu familia solo o tu comunidad no es tu comunidad sola. No somos todos y es muy difícil hacerlo, pero es un trabajo que yo pienso que es verdaderamente esencial para transición interbienes, ya. Eso, gracias.
Bueno, pues qué buenos momentos poder compartir. It's very, very good to share. And I wish to open more spaces to make this network live and to see each other and give a big hug. Darnos un buen abrazo.
Gracias, Cucu, por traer la palabra del sur con el corazón. Muchas gracias, preciosa.
Gracias, Cucu. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bueno, yo no quería romper el tiempo del break. Yo sé que muchos todavía están en break, sino aprovechar que estamos juntos en este espacio, ¿no?
Está bien, no te preocupes. Está perfecto. Now, yes, we come back and we continue with the session. Just want to know that Pablo is ready and he's already interpreting. And there are too many little windows that I can't find him. Ah, okay, I
Pablo,
see
it's
his
thumbs
thumbs up. Perfect. Yeah, great. So we continue and we are moving on to the latest part of this session. We have around 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So we invite you to type. If you have a question to any of the panelists, type your question in the chat. And we will be directing them to the panelists. Please make sure to mention to whom you are directing the question, if it's not an open question. So yeah, and also if you're interested in sharing reflections and keeping the conversation alive, we invite you to join the following session, which will begin at 3:35 p.m. UTC. And I'm going to share, or maybe Philippe will be sharing, the Transition Cafe session in the Zoom link. So when we finish this session, we will have like a 5 minutes bio break. And if you want to continue the conversation, we join this other Zoom link. And for now, you can either ask a question in Spanish or English. And I see that Deborah would like to add a comment about Thrutopias.
Thanks, Esther.
Right.
So I said to Manda that I would be here and for the time when she couldn't be here for the end, because we've been part of her Thrutopia masterclass for a while now and listening and following her work. So, and I think there are a couple of other people here as well from the Thrutopian group, Shona and others. Yes, hi. So one thing I wanted to reflect on and add to what Manda was saying, and one of the reasons I suggested that Manda could join us here today, was, so I work for Transition Network. I'm the other co-lead link along with Filipa. And I think that this concept of Thrutopia is really helpful for us with the transition narrative, because in the past, we've sometimes, as Rob pointed out, sort of faced a critique of, oh, transition is too positive, or it's naively optimistic, or these sorts of things. And it's like this idea of utopia that Manda was pointing to. If we just say everything's going to be fine, we can all reach utopia. It's not helpful, but neither is it helpful to live in this expectation of dystopia and everything is going to be terrible. And in transition, I think we've had this very strong practice of preferred future visioning, whether it's getting in Rob's time machine, or whether it's James McKay, who does the drawings of the future, the man that draws the future, who Rob interviewed sometime. His work is very good. And Manda talks about this too. It's like we have to create the vision of the future that we want. But that's not enough either, as Andrew was saying. Then we have to take the practical steps and we have to specify and share what those steps are and do them. And I think now it's like there's no excuse anymore, because we actually do know what the steps are. And earlier today in the Living Systems and Regenerative Design session, we were talking about how we can look to living systems, look to what we call nature as if it's separate from us, and we know it's not. But we can look to the wisdom of living systems, and we can look to the wisdom of traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous peoples, as Kuku is saying. And we can see these principles and practices that support living systems to thrive, that support us to thrive, and that create community. And these are just one set of the solutions that we know are available now, and the practices that are available. So I love the idea of the Thrutopia and transition being very Thrutopian. We do the visioning of the preferred future, and then we share the practices that work to help us get there. And that's what today is all about, right? The day of transition practice and the Practicing Transition campaign. These are our Thrutopian steps, these practices that we're sharing, the stories that we're sharing. So that's I think really exciting, this idea of the practical steps that we all take together and we learn from each other to take us through to this more thriving and just and safe future for all living beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. And I saw in the chat, Jenny also has a reflection. that would like to share?
Hi, everybody. Buenos días a todos mis amigos en América del Sur. Muy bueno verte. So yeah, hi everybody. Thanks ever so much for the talk. All the perspectives have been really interesting. I've never heard of the concept of Thrutopia before, but it's a fantastic concept, and I think it's something that I'm going to hold close moving forwards, and thinking about kind of, you know, changing the model. But I think, you know, we've all been talking about, you know, the importance of developing visions and ideas. And I think now it's for us to all think about what we've heard today in this session, and how we can take all of the ideas and the theories back into practice, into our projects, and into the context within which we work, which are all very different from each other. And then I think, you know, within those projects, in my experience, there's always kind of a plurality of perspectives. And so one thing that we hold as kind of a way of thinking is, you know, have a vision, think about some of the steps, but, you know, start with what you can and you build from that over time. But holding that, you know, what if vision of the future close as you move towards it, and it's a journey, and then at some point that what if will change into another what if. But I think during that journey, there's this idea of what we call, where I'm working at the moment, of healthy conflict. And it's part of that kind of design and development process of a project where there's a lot of different ideas, and sometimes they rub up against each other. And it's a concept that happens in design as well as practical projects, that there's always a little bit of conflict, but from that can come something that works really, really well together. It's that melding of different perspectives. So, for instance, yesterday I was in a talk with the University of Colombia, and they had come to visit the island where I work in Cartagena, and explore the community and the difficulties of the community, and then apply their urban design knowledge into what could be a vision for the future for the island. And then they received feedback from the community as to, you know, the elements that could work really well, the elements that maybe need to be refined a little bit more. But it meant that these two completely, you know, wildly distanced perspectives could come together. And I think that's something really important that we have to do, is kind of be there with an open heart and listen to those perspectives, and be curious and listen to different perspectives, and then apply them to what we're doing on the ground. So yeah, that was my reflection more than anything. And just to say thanks to everybody.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I see Filipa's hand.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say something that comes back very often when I talk about visioning of the future for initiatives. In my own initiatives, or when I go and support other initiatives on the ground. There is something that when we talk about visioning of the future, people think that it's limited to the exercise of imagining the future in 50 years. And the exercise is that, but it's not only that. What I think that is really, really interesting is every time that a group has a difficulty, to sit down and imagine with fun how it would be if we can do an amazing event, or an amazing, like today we had another session of stories about, you know, experiences, and there were several in Croatia, Nenad. There was the story of this square that was gray, and suddenly it became so green, and suddenly there was loads of things happening there. And this is only possible because people had a visioning about this square different than gray, and you don't have to do the visioning for the 50 years. You can do exercising your imagination as you go in all projects that we are in. And this helps opening the mind into creativity and possibility. And I have several examples of miracles that happen in places like in Portugal, where, you know, for example, we did like with an exercise of visioning, we imagine a huge conference of 3 days with a budget of 2,000 euros. I don't know how, $2,000 more or less, for around 700 people coming from all over the world, 11 nationalities and things like that, and with no money. So, and this was possible, I think, because of the exercise of dreaming that anything we wanted to happen would happen with creativity. So, and this was I know that was not imagination for 50 years, but it was just that step. But the feedback we had after that is that people believed that they could do anything by imagining and then being really creative and supporting each other to make it happen. So just to say that what I normally suggest is keep practicing your imagination in small steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Filipa.
No sé si haya tiempito para hacer una puntada más.
La última, sí, para ti. Thank you.
Bueno, aquí hay una frase muy bella del pueblo maya, trayendo también así las palabras de Filipa, y es: quien cree, crea. Quien crea, hace. Quien hace, transforma, y a sí mismo y a la sociedad en la que vive. Entonces creo que ahí es, primero, agradecerles a todos la valentía, el coraje de cambiar las rutas, de lanzarnos a hacer cosas nuevas, diferentes, a inspirarnos primero a nosotros mismos e inspirar a otros, porque eso sucede cuando uno está totalmente convencido y amando lo que hace. Entonces, para nosotros, por ejemplo, desde las cosmovisiones ancestrales también es muy importante esto que hablamos mucho del gobierno, los poderes, los paradigmas, ¿no? En los momentos de transformación profunda, nosotros consideramos el tiempo en espiral. Entonces, en el tiempo en espiral, primero inicia el alma, luego le da la vuelta, se une con el cuerpo. Viene la pareja, la familia, la comunidad, el territorio, la madre tierra, el sistema solar, el útero cósmico y todos los multiversos, todos los otros lugares cósmicos. Y asimismo está conectado en cada pensamiento, en cada palabra, en cada acción. Cada momento estamos creando y co-creando con el universo. Y como somos diseñados con la misma sabiduría divina de este impulso de la vida, ¿no? De este impulso de la creatividad frente a cualquier crisis, frente a cualquier aprendizaje, a los dolores, a saber a qué sabes estas emociones, ¿no? Cómo pasar estas dificultades juntos, pues es muy importante seguirse elaborando adentro, porque lo que esté adentro está afuera, así como está nuestro adentro, está afuera, ¿no? Así como están nuestras sangres, así están los ríos afuera, así está como está nuestro esqueleto, dicen aquí los mayores y las mayoras de los pueblos indígenas, como estén nuestros huesos, están las montañas, ¿no? Como esté nuestro pensamiento, está nuestro aire. Y eso va muy relacionado también con lo que comemos. Entonces, la relación profunda de lo que comemos para poder conectar con esa memoria de la tierra y recordar el ombligo donde nacemos, ¿no? Entonces, es cómo volver a traer esa memoria de los territorios donde todos nosotros nacimos de un porito de la madre tierra. ¿sí? Y ahí traemos la memoria de esa montaña, de ese río, de esa agua, de ese aire, de esa semilla, y la seguimos caminando. Entonces, para nosotros el tema del gobierno y el tema de cambiar los paradigmas está también en pensar cómo nos autogobernamos, cómo estamos decidiendo, cómo estamos pensando, cómo estamos hablando. Y esto es una decisión no solo política, sino es una decisión activa que crea y co-crea. Para nosotros el gobierno mayor y desde donde se toman las decisiones es consultándole a la montaña, ¿no? Y estos son todos los cambios de paradigma que vamos a seguir experimentando entre todos y compartiendo, dándonos la mano, abrazándonos en este momento, que lo estamos haciendo bien, estamos dando lo máximo. Y va esto mejor, esto es imparable, ¿no? Según nuestro pensamiento, este nuevo tiempo, todas las alineaciones cósmicas, es imparable. La nueva humanidad, las semillas nuevas que somos, la unión del cóndor, el águila, el quetzal, la anaconda, el jaguar, ya lo estamos haciendo nosotros mismos. El despertar de esta nueva gente que somos, ya lo estamos haciendo. Entonces, pues vamos a seguir adelante con la fuerza y el poder del amor y que sigamos abriendo estos espacios, estas acupunturas en la tierra, en donde estamos sanando esa reconexión con todos los seres. Cada vez que hacemos estos espacios, los círculos en cada lugar, nuestros encuentros en nuestros territorios, cuando abrimos nuestra casa, que sucedan estas ideas creativas, estos cambios, ¿no? Ahí estamos también sanando esa parte territorial de la tierra, esa acupuntura. Estamos dando un mensaje a la madre. Entonces, para terminar aquí, les comparto algo de la ley de origen nuestra, que en la ley de origen se habla que todo es para cuidar todo, absolutamente todo, el mínimo pensamiento, la palabra, la acción, pero todo con lo que habitamos. Chiscuachetiscuache sahaná ashkikamuishka ashkun hicha. Aquí vinimos a danzar y a cantar para comunicarnos con todos los seres. Esa es nuestra misión, disfrutar la vida, estar en vibración bonita, amorosa, y eso es lo que se va sembrando en cada paso. Gracias a todos y que siga estas prácticas llenando jardines de vida en cada lugar.